"Stay with me tonight," he whispered. Lila's pen was still touching the contract. The ink wasn't dry. She looked up at Ethan Caldwell, billionaire stranger, the man who had just bought 6 months of her life, and she saw it. The crack. One single fracture in all that controlled untouchable distance. She should have said no. The contract said no. Everything logical said no. But Ethan's hand found her face, and he kissed her. Not strategically, not carefully. A complete catastrophic loss of control that destroyed every rule they'd built. And that one kiss changed everything neither of them had meant to feel. If this story already has you, subscribe now and tell me what city you're watching from. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and expensive decisions, and Lila Hart had been sitting in that chair for 40 minutes before Ethan Caldwell walked in. She heard him before she saw him. Not loud. That was the thing about men like Ethan, they didn't need volume. She heard the quiet authority of his footsteps, the way the receptionist outside stopped mid-sentence when he passed. The way the room seemed to rearrange itself around his arrival, without him asking it to. He sat down across from her, set a single file folder on the table, and looked at her the way someone looks at a contract, not at a person. "You're Lila Hart." "You're late," she said. Something moved across his face, not offense, closer to surprise, like he hadn't expected her to open with that. 15 minutes, he said. "I know, I counted." He opened the folder. "Then you already know you need this more than I do." That landed. She felt it in her chest, the particular sting of a true thing, said without cruelty, which somehow made it worse. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the papers he'd slid toward her, at the figures printed in clean black font numbers that represented her mother's hospital debt, her sister's tuition, the back rent on the apartment she'd been holding together with side work and sheer stubbornness for 2 years. One signature. 6 months. Enough money to make all of it disappear. "Walk me through it again," she said, "so I'm sure we understand each other." Ethan leaned back. He had the particular stillness of someone who had learned early that stillness was power. "You become my wife on paper. You attend events when required. You live at the estate. You do not speak to the press without my legal team's approval. You do not form personal relationships with my staff that could complicate the arrangement. And at the end of 6 months after the inheritance dispute is settled, we file quietly, part professionally, and you receive the full sum outlined in Section 4. And your board believes this is real. My board, my family's legal representatives, and my cousin Marcus, who is currently contesting my grandfather's will and has every reason to paint me as unstable and unfit." His voice didn't change when he said it. Not a flicker. "A married man is harder to dismiss." Lila looked at him. "What happened to your last marriage?" The stillness cracked. Just for half a second, a tightening around his eyes, something that moved through him, and was gone before she could name it. "That's not part of the arrangement," he said. "I'm asking anyway. And I'm telling you it's not relevant." She held the look for another beat. Then she picked up the pen. "Section 4. The full amount transferred within 30 days of our legal filing." "Correct. And if either party violates the terms, penalties are outlined in Section 7. I'd recommend reading it." She read it. All of it, including the last page, the one about emotional non-involvement, the one that used phrases like "no romantic entanglement" and "no personal dependency," and relationship boundaries strictly maintained for the duration of the agreement. It read like a warning dressed up as a legal clause. She signed it anyway. What she didn't tell him was that her hand had gone cold halfway through reading it. Not from fear. From something she couldn't name yet. Something that felt like standing at the edge of a decision and knowing, even as you step forward, that the ground on the other side is different than it looks. She slid the folder back. He looked at her signature. Then he looked at her. "Welcome to the arrangement, Ms. Hart." "It's Lila," she said. "For the purposes of this arrangement." "It's Lila," she said again, quieter. He closed the folder. "The car will pick you up Thursday morning. Bring what you need for 6 months. We'll handle the rest." She stood, gathered her bag, and walked to the door. She had her hand on the frame when he spoke again, not loud, almost casual. "You didn't hesitate," he said. "Most people hesitate." She turned. "Most people aren't where I am." She left before he could respond. Outside, the Texas afternoon hit her full in the face, heat and noise, and the ordinary chaos of a city that didn't know or care what she'd just done. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed. 6 months. Strictly business. She could do this. She told herself that 4 times on the drive home. She didn't own anything that belonged in a house like Ethan Caldwell's. That was the first thing she thought when the car pulled through the gates Thursday morning. The estate wasn't a house, it was a statement. 30 acres of working ranch outside Austin, with a main house that had been in the Caldwell family for 3 generations, and wore that history the way old wealth always does, without effort, without apology, without even being aware of itself. Lila had packed 2 rolling bags and a garment case with her better work clothes. Standing in the front entrance, looking at the height of the ceilings and the length of the hallway and the particular quality of the light through those tall windows, she felt her 2 rolling bags become smaller in her hands. A woman named Doris, who managed the household staff with the cheerful efficiency of someone who had been doing it for decades and had seen everything twice, met her at the door. "Mrs. Caldwell." Doris said it warmly, like she meant it. Lila almost corrected her. Almost. "Please, Doris, it's Lila." Doris smiled the smile of someone filing that information away. "Mr. Caldwell is at the South Barn. He'll be in for dinner at 7. I'll show you to your rooms." Your rooms, plural. Lila followed her up the staircase and down a hallway and through a door into a suite that was larger than the apartment she'd been living in. "Mr. Caldwell's rooms are on the other end of the hall," Doris said, arranging herself carefully in the doorway. "He mentioned you'd want to know the layout." "He mentioned." Lila set her garment case down. "Thank you, Doris." When the door closed, she sat on the edge of the bed, a king bed with actual linen, the kind of linen that had a thread count rather than a price tag, and she looked at the room around her and thought, 6 months. She could stay in beautiful rooms for 6 months. That was not hardship. That was not complicated. She repeated it until she believed it. Dinner that first night was worse than silence. It was the performance of conversation, 2 adults sitting at opposite ends of a long table making the kind of careful, correct exchanges that had nothing underneath them. Ethan asked about her work. She told him about the alteration studio she'd been running out of a rented space downtown, the bridal clients, the occasional custom pieces. He listened with attention that felt professional rather than interested. She asked about the ranch. He answered in facts. She asked about the horses. He answered in more facts. They finished eating. He folded his napkin. "We have an event Saturday," he said. "The Caldwell Foundation's annual donor dinner. I'll have my publicist send you the details. Dress is formal. My assistant will arrange anything you need from the wardrobe." "I can dress myself," she said. "I know. The offer stands regardless." "Ethan?" He looked up. It was the first time she'd used his name, and something in the air registered it. "I want to be clear about something," she said. "I signed the contract. I understand the terms. I will do everything you need at the public events. But inside this house, I need you to talk to me like I'm a person and not a piece of the arrangement. Can you do that?" The pause that followed was exactly 1 beat too long. "I'll try," he said. "That's honest." "I tend to be." She looked at him across the length of the table. He looked back. For a moment, under all the careful distance, something very faintly present passed between them, too early and too quiet to name, barely there at all, and gone before either of them thought to examine it. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Lila." She walked upstairs. Behind her, she heard him push back his chair. She heard the sound of him going somewhere else in the house. She didn't look back. She woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of someone walking. Not pacing. walking the deliberate quiet walk of someone who doesn't want to wake the house but can't be still. She lay in the dark and listened. The footsteps moved down the hallway past her door, paused at the top of the stairs, and then continued on. She told herself it wasn't her business. Contract. 6 months. Professional arrangement. She lay there for 20 minutes. The walking continued. She got up, pulled on the robe, and went to the kitchen. He was standing at the window over the sink with a glass of water he hadn't drunk, looking out at the dark. He heard her come in, but didn't turn immediately. When he did, his expression was the carefully neutral one she was already learning to recognize as the face he showed when he'd been caught being something other than controlled. "Can't sleep," she said. "It happens." She went to the cabinet, found mugs, found the coffee, started making it without asking because it was 2 a.m. and some things don't require permission. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know." She made the coffee. She set a mug in front of him. She leaned against the counter with her own mug, and they stood in the kitchen in the middle of the night in the particular quiet of a house that didn't know yet what it was holding, and neither of them said anything for a while. "The walking?" she said finally. "Does it help?" He considered the question seriously, which she was starting to understand was how he considered everything. "Not particularly. But you do it anyway. Some habits outlast their usefulness." She looked at him. In the kitchen light at 2 a.m, without the board meeting posture and the careful distance, he looked not different. More visible. Like a version of himself that existed underneath the one he'd learned to show. "I do the same thing," she said. "Not walking, sewing. 3 a.m, hemming something that doesn't need hemming just because my hands need to be doing something so my brain will stop." He looked at her for a long moment. "What does your brain do when it stops?" "Counts," she said. "Old debts. Things I should have done differently. The usual." Something moved in his face. Not pity, not quite. Recognition, maybe. The smallest version of it. "Yes," he said almost to himself. "The usual." They drank their coffee. He didn't go back to walking. She didn't go back to bed. They stood in the kitchen until past 3, not filling the silence, but letting it be something other than empty. When she finally said goodnight, she meant it differently than she had at dinner. She was 3 steps down the hallway when she heard him say quietly, almost not quite loud enough to carry, "Thank you for the coffee." She didn't turn around. "It's just coffee, Ethan." "I know," he said. "Thank you anyway." The next 2 weeks settled into a rhythm that looked like structure and felt like tension. Mornings Ethan was gone before she woke. She learned this the way you learn the patterns of a house by the absence of things. The truck already moved from the drive. The kitchen already faintly smelling of coffee he'd made for himself in the dark. A pair of boots missing from the mudroom. He ran the ranch with the kind of relentless early morning energy that she recognized as its own form of avoidance. The kind of work a person does not because it needs doing at 5 a.m., but because the alternative is standing still. Evenings he returned quieter. Not unfriendly, just sealed. Like whatever the day had taken from him was something he managed alone behind the particular closed door of his own self-sufficiency. She noticed everything and said nothing. But she was a seamstress. 15 years of reading fabric, reading fit, reading the small ways a garment tells you where the body holds its tension. She'd trained herself to see what other people missed. And what she saw in Ethan Caldwell in those first 2 weeks was a man performing the function of himself with extraordinary precision and at extraordinary cost. She didn't say this. It wasn't her place. Contract, 6 months. Professional. But she started leaving a mug of coffee on the kitchen counter at 7 p.m. when he came in from the ranch. Not a gesture, not an overture. Just coffee left where he'd find it. The first evening she heard him stop in the kitchen. A pause. Then the sound of the mug being picked up. He never mentioned it. She never explained it. By the end of the first week, it was simply something that happened. Marcus Caldwell arrived on a Tuesday without calling ahead. Lila was in the sitting room off the main hallway, altering a sleeve on a client piece she'd brought her work with her, the way you bring anything that keeps you anchored. When she heard the front door open, and a voice she didn't know fill the entrance hall with the particular loudness of someone who had decided in advance that the house was theirs. "Ethan! Come out, come out." She set down the sleeve, stood, moved to the doorway. He was tall Marcus Caldwell, with the family features softened into something that might have been charming under different circumstances. He wore the clothes of a man who spent money on looking casual. He had a lawyer with him, young, attentive, carrying a leather portfolio like a weapon. He saw Lila before he saw anyone else. "Well," he said, and his smile was the kind that arrived faster than warmth. "This must be the wife." "This must be Marcus," she said. His smile got sharper. "I heard Ethan found himself someone. Didn't expect—" He gestured vaguely in her direction. "This." "You can say what you mean," she said. "I don't startle." Doris appeared from the back hallway, clocking the situation with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd managed this family's dramas longer than any of them had been interesting. "Mr. Caldwell is in the south office. I'll let him know you're here." Marcus moved toward the sitting room, like he'd already been invited. He stopped at the threshold, looked at the work spread across the side table, the sleeve, the pinning, the tension gauge she used for stretch fabric, and looked back at Lila with something that wasn't quite a question. "Seamstress," she said before he could make it one. "Interesting choice," he said, and it meant nothing and everything at once. "For a man trying to inherit 30 acres of Texas, you're spending a lot of time assessing someone else's living room," Lila said pleasantly. He stared at her. She picked up her sleeve and her needle and sat back down. Ethan walked in 40 seconds later, and whatever Marcus had arranged on his face by then was something professional. But Lila caught the look Marcus slid toward her before he turned, not angry, recalibrating. She'd surprised him, and he was a man who didn't expect to be surprised, and she could see him deciding what to do with that. Ethan saw it too. She caught his eyes across the room for just a moment, a glance that was over before it began, brief enough to be coincidence. But it wasn't. He'd seen her hold Marcus, and something in that glance said good. And then he moved forward to greet his cousin with the controlled, impenetrable courtesy of a man who had been preparing for this moment for months. "Marcus, I didn't know you were coming." "I was in the neighborhood," Marcus said, smiling. "You live 4 hours away. Long neighborhood." After Marcus left 2 hours later with his lawyer and his portfolio, and whatever he'd come to assess or rattle, Ethan found her still in the sitting room finishing the sleeve. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She didn't look up. "You didn't tell me he was coming," she said. "He wasn't supposed to. He does that. To throw you off? To look for cracks." She snipped the thread. "Did he find any?" "Not today." She finally looked up. He was leaning in the doorframe with his arms crossed, and there was something in his posture that was different from his usual careful distance. Not relaxed, but something adjacent. Like a man who had braced for a hit and found that it hadn't landed. "He was testing me," she said. "Yes." The interesting choice comment. "He expected you to flinch." She set the sleeve down. "Why would I flinch?" Something passed through Ethan's face. It moved too fast to catch cleanly, but she caught the edges of it. Surprise again. The same kind as in the lawyer's office the first day. The same small dislocation of a man whose models for what people do aren't matching what she keeps doing instead. "Most people do," he said. "I'm not most people." A long beat, something quiet in it. "No," he said. "You're not." He pushed off from the doorframe. "Dinner's in an hour. Doris made something involving brisket and an opinion." She almost laughed. Actually, almost. It caught in her throat, the laugh, and came out as something smaller. A half breath, a half smile. He saw it. He was already turning away when he saw it, and she watched him pause, just for the space of a moment, as if the sound of her almost laughing was something he needed to register and file before he could keep moving. Then he was gone down the hallway. And Lila sat with her sewing in her lap and looked at the empty doorframe and told herself, 6 months. Contract. Business. And wondered how many times she was going to have to say it before she stopped needing to. The Caldwell Foundation dinner was in 4 days. Ethan's publicist, a sharp, fast-talking woman named Rhea, who communicated almost exclusively by text, and had opinions about everything, sent over a dossier on every guest who would be in attendance. Lila read it the way she read patterns, looking for the places where things were likely to pull. 43 names, business associates, board members, 3 journalists from financial publications, and 1 name near the bottom circled in Rhea's notes. Diana Ashworth, former Caldwell associate connected to Marcus, known to ask personal questions in professional settings. Watch out for Diana, Rhea had texted below it. She smiles and guts you at the same time. Lila had sat with that note for a while. She'd built her life around alterations, around taking something that didn't fit and making it work without showing the work. She could do that in public with her eyes closed. She could play a wife. She could be warm, appropriate, engaged, protective where it counted. What she hadn't calculated was how much of it would feel from the inside, like it was becoming true as she performed it. She was sitting with this not comfortably but honestly when Ethan knocked on the open door of the sitting room 2 days before the dinner. He had something in his hand, a small box. "What's that?" she said. "Your rings." He said it without any particular weight. "We need to be consistent in public. My grandmother's setting the team adjusted the size." She took the box, opened it. A band and a solitaire, simple, old-fashioned, beautiful, in the way that things made without trying to be beautiful sometimes are. She picked up the engagement ring and turned it in the light. "Whose was it?" she said. "My grandmother's, Catherine Caldwell. And before her, her mother's." He paused. "It's been in the family a long time." "That's a lot of history for a business arrangement." "It's just a prop," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the ring, not at her. And his expression for just that moment was something she hadn't seen on him before. Not grief exactly, not quite, but something in the neighborhood of grief, the way midnight is in the neighborhood of tomorrow. "Ethan?" He looked up. "What happened to your last marriage?" she asked again. Same question, different room. Different 2 weeks of knowing him behind it. The silence lasted longer this time. He didn't shut it down the way he had in the lawyer's office. He just held it. Let it sit there between them. "She left," he said finally. 2 years ago. Before my grandfather died. Before the will, the dispute, all of it. A beat. She said I was better at running things than at living in them." Lila looked at the ring in her hand. Didn't say anything. "She wasn't wrong," he said. "I just hadn't realized it was a problem until she said it out loud." The room held that for a moment. Then Lila slid the ring onto her left hand. It fit. "I think Catherine had small hands," she said. Something in Ethan's chest seemed to release. She couldn't see it, but she felt it the way you feel a room change when someone stops holding their breath. "She did," he said. Lila looked at the ring on her hand, then at him. "I'll be ready at 6 on Saturday," she said. He nodded, stood. He was almost to the door when she said, "Ethan," the thing she said about running things versus living in them. He stopped. "That's the kind of thing a person can change," she said, "if they want to." He stood in the doorway for a long moment, not turning around. She watched the line of his shoulders and the particular quality of his stillness, the kind that means something is moving inside it. "Good night, Lila," he said. "Good night." She listened to his footsteps down the hallway. She listened to them stop somewhere near the top of the stairs. A pause, then continue. She looked at Catherine Caldwell's ring on her hand for a long time after that. And the thing that frightened her quietly in the way that real things frighten you, not all at once, but in increments, was not that she was playing a role. It was that somewhere in the last 2 weeks, without asking permission or announcing itself, something had started playing her. She looked at the ring. She looked at the empty doorway. 6 months, she thought. But the word months had stopped feeling like a number. It had started feeling like a warning. That night past midnight, she heard the walking again. She lay still this time and didn't get up. Listened to it down the hall to the stairs. Pause, return. The quiet, deliberate circuit of a man who couldn't rest inside himself and had learned to carry that around like something he deserved. She pressed her hand flat against the mattress. She felt Catherine Caldwell's ring against her palm. She stared at the ceiling in the dark. Don't, she told herself. And the night didn't answer because nights don't. They just hold what's in them patient and complete until morning comes and everyone pretends they slept fine. But they both knew in their separate rooms, in their separate darkness, in the silence of a house that was starting to remember what it felt like to hold more than one person's quiet, that something had already shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly. The way a current shifts invisible underground, carrying everything with it before anyone on the surface sees a thing. The Saturday dinner changed things. Not loudly, not all at once. But the way a fault line changes a landscape invisible until it isn't, and then suddenly everything you thought was solid has a different shape. Lila had spent 20 minutes in front of the mirror before leaving her room that evening, not because she was vain, but because she understood with the precise professional clarity of someone who had spent 15 years making clothing do emotional work that what she wore to that dinner was armor. She'd chosen a deep, wine-colored dress from her own wardrobe, not the wardrobe Ethan's assistant had offered. Not the Caldwell account, hers cut, simply fitted well, the kind of dress that didn't announce itself and didn't need to. When she came downstairs, Ethan was waiting in the entrance hall. He looked at her. Not a sweep, not an assessment. He looked at her the way someone looks at something that surprises them into stillness. "That's yours," he said. "Yes." "You didn't use the billet, no." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, something quieter. "Good," he said and offered her his arm. The drive to the venue was mostly quiet, which she was learning was different from silence with Ethan. Silence was what happened when there was nothing. Quiet was what happened when there was too much and he was managing it. "Rhea briefed you on Diana Ashworth," he said. "She did. Diana will try to get you alone. If that happens, I know how to handle it. You don't know what she'll ask." "It doesn't matter what she asks," Lila said. "I know what I'll answer." He looked at her in the low light of the car. "Which is what?" "Whatever a woman who loves her husband would say," Lila said. And then more quietly, "Which is different for every woman." He turned back to the window. But she'd seen it, that brief fractional shift in his expression, the thing that moved through him when she said something he hadn't prepared for. She filed it away. She was building a collection of those moments, though she hadn't yet decided what she was going to do with it. The venue was a world she'd moved through professionally, but never inhabited the particular compressed atmosphere of Austin money where the drinks were good and the smiles were load-bearing and everyone in the room knew exactly what everyone else was worth and pretended not to. Lila had sewn gowns for women at events like this. She had never been one of the women inside one. She adjusted without showing the adjustment, which was its own kind of skill. Ethan moved through the room with the ease of someone who had grown up inside this world and had never had to think about how to fit it. His hand found the small of her back when it needed to, not possessive, not performed, just present, a quiet signal to the room that was also without his seeming to intend it a quiet signal to her. She felt it. She felt it more than she should have. The first hour went cleanly. Board members, donors, foundation associates. Everyone was warm in the way that people are warm when the man next to you controls something they want. Lila smiled, answered questions about how they met the story. Rhea had prepared was simple enough to be believable, detailed enough to hold and held Ethan's arm, and performed a marriage with the craft of someone who understood what fit and what didn't. It was going fine. It was going exactly according to plan. And then Diana Ashworth found her at the drinks table. She was somewhere in her mid-50s. Diana polished in the way that expensive maintenance over many years produces, with eyes that moved faster than her smile. She came at Lila sideways, started with a compliment about the dress, pivoted to asking about Lila's work, and then in the same conversational breath without a seam. "You must be so glad Ethan finally moved on. After everything with Claire." Claire! The name landed in Lila's chest like a stone dropped in water. She hadn't known the name. Ethan had said she left, and nothing else, and Lila had not pushed, because some doors you let people open in their own time. She kept her face exactly where it was. "Ethan's been extraordinary," she said, and meant it to carry its own ambiguity. Diana's smile shifted. "Claire was extraordinary too, in her way." A pause timed. Of course she understood him differently. They'd known each other since college. 20 years is a long time. "It is," Lila said. "She said the ranch was what broke them, that he put the land before everything." Diana tilted her head. "I imagine that must be a concern for you too, starting fresh, not knowing all of it." "I know what matters," Lila said. "And what's that?" Lila looked at her directly. "Whether he comes home." Diana blinked. It was the smallest thing, a single involuntary blink, and then the smile was back but recalibrated, now reassessing. "Well," she said, "that's one way to put it." "It's the only way that means anything," Lila said pleasantly and excused herself. She was 3 steps away when her hands started shaking. Not visibly, but she felt it, the fine tremor of something released that had been held very tight. Claire. 20 years. She understood him differently. She found a quiet corner. Breathed once. Twice. Ethan materialized beside her 30 seconds later, close enough that no one watching would see anything but a husband checking on his wife. "What did she say?" His voice was very low. "She told me about Claire." The pause was brief and total. "I see," he said. "You didn't tell me her name." "No." "Ethan." "This isn't the place." "I know. But I need you to know that she told me, so you're not surprised later." She looked up at him. "And so you understand that it didn't break anything." He looked down at her with an expression she couldn't fully read, complicated and still, and something she might have called grateful, if she'd been willing to go that far. "Let's get through the evening," he said. "I know, keep moving." She straightened slightly. "Your hand, back where it was. We have an audience." His hand found her back again, and this time she noticed it because she was noticing everything. Now his hand was less managed than before, less deliberate, more like a reflex. She noticed that too. They were home by 11. The house was quiet, Doris long gone, the kitchen holding its nighttime calm. Lila had her shoes off before she reached the top of the stairs and was already moving toward her room when Ethan said her name behind her. She turned. He was standing in the hallway with his jacket over his arm, and his expression stripped of the event face, entirely standing in his own house, in a way that looked for the first time like it cost him something. "Her name was Claire Merritt," he said. "We were together from college, married for 6 years. She left 18 months before my grandfather died." Lila stood still. "She said I treated the ranch like it was more alive than she was," he said. "She wasn't wrong. I knew how to manage land, cattle, money problems with solutions. I didn't know how to manage." He stopped. "I didn't know how to stay in a room that didn't have a problem I could fix." "What did you do when she left?" "I worked more," he said, which was probably her point. The hallway held the answer between them for a moment. "Why are you telling me this now?" Lila asked. "Because Diana told you first, and because you said it didn't break anything, and I wanted to—" Another stop. He was a man who chose words the way he chose everything, carefully at real cost. "I wanted you to have the full version rather than Diana's." Lila looked at him. "The full version is that your marriage ended because you didn't know how to be in it." "Yes." "And you think that's changed?" The pause this time was the longest yet. "I don't know," he said. "I'm not sure I trust my own assessment of that." Something in Lila's chest pulled. Not sympathy exactly. More like recognition. the particular recognition of someone who has spent a long time being competent at survival and is only slowly learning to identify what survival has cost them. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Thank you for tonight," he said. "You didn't have to handle Diana the way you did." "What way was that?" "Like you were actually protecting something." She looked at him steadily. "I was." She went to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, with her hands in her lap, and Catherine Caldwell's ring on her finger, and she thought about a woman named Claire, who had left a man who didn't know how to stay present, and she thought about the way Ethan's hand had felt different the second time it found her back. This is a contract, she told herself. The ring caught the light from the window. 6 months. She lay back and stared at the ceiling, and told herself that tonight had been a performance, and that she'd performed it well, and that everything she felt was contextual and temporary and would resolve cleanly when the arrangement ended. She told herself this for a very long time. She did not believe it. Marcus called the next morning. She knew it was him because she was passing the hallway study when Ethan's voice changed the particular contained shift of a man bracing for something he was also too proud to brace for visibly. She didn't slow down. She went to the kitchen. She made coffee. She listened to the muffled, controlled rhythm of Ethan's voice through the wall. Not the words, but the shape of them, short, then longer, then a long silence, then short again. He came out 20 minutes later. His face was the neutral one, but tighter than usual, pulled closer to the bone. "Marcus is filing an emergency motion," he said. "He's claiming the marriage was arranged specifically to protect the inheritance and should be considered fraudulent under the terms of the will." Lila set down her mug. "Can he prove it?" "He can't prove anything yet, but he doesn't need proof at this stage. He needs grounds. And if he can demonstrate that the marriage is not genuine—" "What defines genuine?" she said. "Cohabitation, shared finances, social integration, length of relationship prior to marriage." A beat. "And witnesses who can confirm consistent behavior." "Doris," she said, "and the staff, and everyone who saw us Saturday." "What do we need to do?" He looked at her across the kitchen. "Nothing changes. We continue as planned, but my legal team needs to build a stronger file, which means they'll want documentation, photographs, statements from people who've seen us together. And Marcus will be looking for cracks. Marcus will be looking for anything. A single staff member who reports separate dinners every night, separate schedules, no visible." He stopped. The word he didn't say sat there anyway. "Affection," she said. "Yes." Lila picked up her mug again. Thought about it. "Then we close the cracks." "That means—" "I know what it means." She met his eyes. "It means this gets more convincing, not just in public." "Lila." "I'm not suggesting we change the terms," she said. "I'm saying the terms may need to include breakfast at the same table and not walking separate sides of the house every evening. That's not emotional involvement. That's strategy." He looked at her for a long moment. She kept her expression level. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. She poured him a cup of coffee without asking. He sat down at the kitchen table. She sat down across from him. And that was how they started having breakfast together, not tenderly, not romantically, but with the specific pragmatic intention of two people who had agreed to be convincing. Which was, Lila thought, not entirely unlike how most things begin. With a reason that isn't the real reason. With logic that explains everything except the thing that actually matters. The next 10 days had a different texture. Not because they'd agreed to want them to, but because that was how it worked. You change the behavior, the feeling follows. Or you change the behavior, and you discover the feeling was already there, and you'd just been keeping the behavior away from it. Breakfast together. An hour, sometimes longer, depending on whether conversation found its way in. Ethan talked about the ranch not in the facts and figures way of that first dinner, but in the way of someone who actually loved a thing, and had been keeping that private The specific stubbornness of the Eastfield soil, the 3-year effort to restore the water access that a previous drought had damaged the horse, a gray named Meridian, that had never fully trusted anyone and had cost him more in patience than in money. "Why do you keep her?" Lila asked one morning. "She's worth it," he said. "She's cost you 3 years and she still doesn't trust you." "Some things take longer than they should." He looked at his coffee. "That doesn't mean they're not worth the time." Lila looked at him across the table. He didn't look back, but something in the angle of his head suggested he knew she was looking. She drank her coffee and said nothing, and didn't examine the thing that had just moved through her chest, because she was beginning to understand that examining it would make it real in a way she wasn't ready for. He found her in the evening, 3 days later, sitting at the work table she'd set up in the corner of the sitting room with her client pieces fighting a seam that wasn't lying flat. He didn't say anything. He came in, moved to the armchair nearby, and sat down with a report he'd apparently been planning to read. The room settled into a working quiet, her with the fabric, him with the papers. After 20 minutes, she heard him set the papers down. "What's wrong with it?" he said. "The seam's pulling, the fabric's cut slightly off grain, and I can't get it to lie down without either resetting the entire bodice or—" She stopped. "You don't actually want to know this?" I asked. She looked at him. He was looking at the fabric with the same focused attention he gave to everything. "The grain of the fabric runs in a direction," she said. "If you cut against it even slightly, the whole piece fights you. You can press it, you can try to force it, but it will always pull back toward what it actually is." He was quiet for a moment. "Is there a fix? You can work with it instead of against it," she said. "Adjust everything else to account for what it's naturally doing. It takes longer, but it holds." He nodded slowly, and then in a voice that was careful in a specific way, the way of someone asking more than one thing at once. "Does it ever just correct itself?" She looked at him. "No," she said quietly. "It never does. You have to decide to fix it." The room held that for a while. He picked up his report again. She went back to the seam, but the quiet between them had shifted slightly less empty, more inhabited. The kind of quiet that has weight to it. The kind you feel. Rhea called on a Wednesday with news that landed like weather. "The judge accepted Marcus's emergency motion," she said. "Preliminary hearing in 4 weeks. His team is requesting access to financial records, residential documentation, and is seeking to depose household staff." Ethan's jaw tightened. Lila watched it happen across the kitchen table. "Can we prepare the staff?" she asked. "Doris, yes. She's been here 30 years, she won't be rattled." Rhea's voice was crisp, efficient. "The newer staff are the risk. 3 of them have only been here since the merger negotiations. They won't have history to draw from." "What does Marcus need to invalidate the marriage?" Ethan asked. "Testimony that it lacks the markers of a genuine relationship. Separate schedules. No observable intimacy. Financial transactions inconsistent with a shared household. Or—" A pause. "A witness willing to state that one or both parties admitted the arrangement was contractual." The word intimacy sat on the table between them. "No one has heard anything like that," Lila said. "No. But they also don't have much to say they've witnessed the opposite. The household records show separate rooms, separate vehicles, separate—" "We'll address that," Lila said. Rhea paused. "How?" "Leave that to us," Lila said. "What does the legal file need?" Rhea listed it. Lila wrote it down. When the call ended, she looked at Ethan. "She mentioned intimacy," he said. "I heard. That's a different category than breakfast." "I know." The silence between them was doing something it hadn't done before. It had edges now, awareness in it. "We don't have to be anything we're not," she said carefully. "But people who are in a real marriage are comfortable in the same space. They don't avoid touching each other in the house. They—" She stopped. Started again. It's not about what's happening between us. It's about what someone watching would believe. What someone watching would believe, he repeated. Yes. He looked at her directly. And you can do that? Keep the line clear between what's performance and what's... Yes, she said. She said it too fast. They both knew it. Neither of them said that. Okay, he said. Then we figure out what that looks like. They figured it out in the careful, pragmatic way of two people who were both very good at solving problems, and neither willing to name what was making this one particularly difficult. They agreed on specifics evenings in shared spaces when possible. Less physical distance when staff were present. The kind of casual, unremarkable closeness that real couples move through so naturally they've stopped noticing it. Small things. Ordinary things. Devastating things, as it turned out, in their cumulative ordinariness. It was a Thursday 3 weeks to the preliminary hearing when it started actually becoming hard. She was standing at the kitchen counter going through her fabric orders, and he came in and reached past her for the cabinet above. The way you do in a house where you've stopped calculating proximity, and his arm came close enough to her shoulder that she could feel the warmth of it. She didn't move. He got what he needed. He stepped back. Sorry, he said by reflex. You don't have to apologize for existing in your own kitchen, she said. He looked at her. She kept her eyes on the orders. He made his coffee and stood 4 feet to her left, and she felt those 4 feet with uncomfortable specificity, and she thought this is the problem. Not that they were pretending, that the pretending had started to feel like less work than the not pretending. She thought about the seam that fights you when it's cut against the grain. She thought about working with it instead of against it. She thought no. She closed the fabric orders. She went back to her room. She sat down at her work table, and she picked up the first client piece in her hand, and she worked for 2 hours without stopping, because her hands needed something to do, so her brain would stop, and what her brain kept doing was counting. Not debts this time. Not the usual. Counting the number of times Ethan's expression had changed in ways that he thought she hadn't seen. Counting the mornings he'd come to breakfast already knowing how she took her coffee without asking. Counting the evenings he'd sat in the chair by her workable, with his report, neither of them needing the room to be quiet together. Counting the specific weight of his hand when it found her back, and the way that weight had changed between the first time and the last. She set down the fabric. She pressed both palms flat on the table. You're in a contract, she told herself. You are performing a function. You are good at your job. This is your job. She believed about half of it. The half she didn't believe was the half that scared her. Because Lila Hart had survived genuinely hard things in her life. Her father leaving when she was 12. Her mother's illness. 2 years of holding a family together on alterations, work and stubbornness. And she knew the difference between something hard and something dangerous. Hard things hurt, and then they're over. Dangerous things hurt, and then they change what you are. She knew with the specific clarity of a woman who had always been honest with herself, even when it wasn't useful, that Ethan Caldwell had become dangerous somewhere in the last 3 weeks. Not because of anything he'd done, because of the 1,000 small things he hadn't done, hadn't performed, hadn't manufactured, hadn't managed into being. The things that had just appeared quietly in the ordinary space of a house that was learning to hold both of them. She looked at Catherine Caldwell's ring on her hand. She thought about what he'd said, some things take longer than they should. That doesn't mean they're not worth the time. She turned the ring slowly on her finger. From somewhere else in the house, she'd learned by now to map his location by sound. Without meaning to, she heard him moving toward the kitchen again. The cabinet. The particular sound of him settling in for the evening. She thought, don't. She thought, but. She thought 6 months was always going to be a problem. You knew that on the first day. You signed the page anyway. She picked up her fabric. She found the seam. She started working with it instead of against it. And out in the kitchen, the light was on. And Ethan Caldwell was doing what he always did in the evening, now making enough coffee for 2, without being asked, because somewhere in the last 3 weeks, it had stopped being a choice he made, and become a thing he simply did. Neither of them had said anything about that. And maybe that was the problem. Or maybe, and this was the thought she kept turning over in the dark, the thought that followed her into sleep and was still there when she woke. Maybe the problem wasn't the coffee. Maybe the problem was that she'd stopped wanting to leave by the time either of them noticed. The preliminary hearing was in 11 days when Rhea called with the kind of news that lands differently depending on where you're standing when you receive it. Lila was standing in the hallway. Ethan was 4 feet behind her coming from the study. They both heard it on speaker because Rhea had stopped asking if it was a good time weeks ago. Marcus's legal team filed a supplemental motion this morning, Rhea said. They're requesting a formal deposition of both parties, separately, in the next 6 days. Ethan said nothing. Lila watched the back of his neck. What are they looking for? He asked. Inconsistencies. If your answers don't align on basic shared life details, daily routines, sleeping arrangements, personal history, they'll use the discrepancies to support the fraud claim. A pause. The judge hasn't ruled on whether to allow it yet. But the request itself is already on the record, which means it's already doing damage. How much damage? Enough that the partners are nervous, Rhea said. And when the partners are nervous, they start making calls to the board. And when the board starts making calls... I understand, Ethan said. The Weston Gala is Saturday night, Rhea continued. Half of Austin's legal and financial community in one room. Marcus will be there. His entire team will be there. And every single person who has a stake in this inheritance dispute will be watching you both. Another pause, this one carrying weight. This isn't a foundation dinner anymore. This is the whole thing. After she hung up, the hallway was very quiet. 6 days, Lila said. I heard. Ethan, if they depose us separately and our answers don't match on things like, I know Lila. Do you know what I take in my coffee? He turned and looked at her. 2 sugars, no cream. But if it's afternoon, you take it black because caffeine hits you differently in the afternoon and you don't sleep well. She looked at him. Do you know what I do when I can't sleep? He said. You walk, she said. You start at the top of the stairs, you go to the kitchen, you stand at the window. You never turn the overhead light on, and you're always back in your room before 4. The silence between them had a particular quality. The quality of 2 people realizing simultaneously that they have been paying far more attention to each other than the contract required. We know each other, she said finally. Yes, he said. We do. Neither of them said what that meant. They went back to their separate corners of the house and did not talk about it again that day. But Lila noticed sitting at her work table that evening that the knowing had changed something in the room. Like a piece of furniture rearranged, the space was the same, but you moved through it differently now. They spent the next 4 days preparing for the gala and quietly preparing each other. Not in sessions, not formally. Ethan didn't do formal when it came to things that required him to be personally present rather than strategically present. But across breakfast, across evenings, across the ordinary moments of a shared house, they built the file. His grandfather's name, William James Caldwell, called Bill by everyone except Marcus, who called him grandfather because Marcus understood the value of formality. His birthday, March 3rd. The reading of the will, a gray Tuesday in October. 6 people in a lawyer's office, and Ethan had kept his face neutral through the entire thing and driven home alone after. She told him her mother's name was Patrice. The debt wasn't medical. Originally, it started as a business loan her father took before he left, which her mother assumed and couldn't manage. And the hospital bills from 3 years ago had layered on top of an already sinking situation. Her sister's name was Becca, 22, studying architecture at UT. The first person in their family who'd had the space to think about what she wanted instead of what was necessary. You paid for it, he said. It wasn't a question. Most of it, she said. The rest is what the arrangement is covering. He nodded slowly. She knows why you're here. She knows I'm doing contract work for a family estate, Lila said. She doesn't know the details. She thinks you're sewing. Something between a grimace and a smile crossed her face. She thinks I'm very well compensated for sewing. He almost laughed. She caught the edge of it, the briefest softening at the corner of his mouth, the almost release of it, and then it was gone, reabsorbed into the careful management of himself that she had spent 6 weeks learning to see around. "She'd be proud of you," he said, "if she knew." Lila looked at her coffee. Or horrified. "Both," he said. "The way people are when they love you and can see that you're capable of more than you give yourself credit for." She looked up at him. He was looking at his own cup. Like he hadn't meant to say it. Or like he'd meant to say it and was now doing the math on whether that had been a mistake. "Ethan, we should go over the timeline again," he said. "Rhea wants the deposition scheduled by Thursday." She let him redirect, but she filed it the way she filed everything. Quietly, without acknowledgement, in the place where she kept the things she wasn't ready to examine. Thursday came with the deposition notice and went with both of them intact. The attorneys questioned them separately as promised Lila in the downstairs conference room, with Ethan's lead counsel, present Ethan in the study, with his personal attorney. 2 hours each. The questions were methodical and designed to find the seams how they met when they decided to marry, what their routines looked like, what they argued about, what they agreed about, whose family they'd spent the most time with, what he did when he was stressed, what she did when she was scared. Lila answered every question in the specific, grounded, unhurried way of someone telling the truth. Because here was the thing she'd realized somewhere in the last 2 weeks that she hadn't expected to realize she was telling the truth. Not the truth, as in this is a genuine marriage. The truth as in this is what I have actually observed and lived and felt inside this house with this man. The truth, as in the details were real, even if the original arrangement wasn't. She didn't examine that too closely. Not yet. When it was over, she found him in the kitchen. He was standing at the counter with a glass of water, and his expression was the stripped-down nighttime one, the 2 a.m. face, which on a Thursday afternoon meant the deposition had cost him something he wasn't going to say. "How was it?" she asked. "Thorough," he said. "Yours." "They asked me what you look like when you're angry." He turned slightly. "What did you say?" "I said you go quiet, that your voice drops instead of rising, that the stillness is the sign, not the volume." She held his gaze. "I said it takes a lot to get there, but when you do, the room feels it before you say anything." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's accurate." "I know it's accurate." Another beat. "What else did they ask?" "Whether we were happy." His jaw moved slightly. "What did you say?" Lila looked at him steadily. "I said we were working on it, the way people who mean it are always working on it." A beat. "I thought that was more believable than saying yes." He set down his glass. He turned fully to face her, and his expression was doing the complicated thing it did when she'd caught him off guard, and he was deciding whether to acknowledge it. "Lila," he said. His voice was careful in a very specific way, the way it was when he was about to say something true that he hadn't planned. "Don't," she said softly. He stopped. "Not today," she said. "Let's just get through Saturday. Then we can figure out what all of this is." He held her eyes. She held his. And then he nodded once, the way he agreed to things he didn't fully accept but chose to honor anyway. "Saturday," he said. "Saturday," she said. The Weston Gala was a different animal from the foundation dinner. Where the foundation dinner had been warm money in its philanthropic costume, performing generosity, the Weston Gala was money without the costume. Power assessment and the particular social violence of Austin's financial elite at the highest pressure point of a contested inheritance dispute. Lila understood this before she arrived. She dressed accordingly. She wore black, her own. Fitted at the shoulder, clean at the hem, nothing borrowed or arranged by Ethan's assistant, because she had learned by now that she performed better inside her own choices. When she came downstairs, Ethan was in the entrance hall in a dark jacket, and he looked at her the way he had at the foundation dinner, that instant of stilled surprise. And then something else moved through his face that hadn't been there the first time. Something quieter and more honest, and considerably more difficult to ignore. You always wear your own, he said. It's the only way I know how to show up, she said. He offered his arm. She took it. The car ride was different this time. Less preparation, more tension. The specific tension of two people who have been inside something longer than they'd planned and can no longer pretend the thing hasn't changed them. He didn't brief her. She didn't ask. They rode in a quiet that was full rather than empty, and when the venue came into view and he turned to look at her, she was already looking at him. Whatever happens tonight, he said. I know, she said. I mean it. If Marcus, Ethan. She turned her hand on his arm slightly, not a grip, a presence. I'm here. Something moved through him. She felt it even through the jacket sleeve. A brief, full-body thing, the exhale of a man who had been braced so long he'd stopped noticing until the bracing released. All right, he said. Let's go. The first hour was controlled theater. Marcus was there with his full team, plus 3 people Lila hadn't seen at the Foundation dinner, new faces carefully positioned, moving through the room, with the specific purposefulness of people being paid to observe. She clocked them within 20 minutes and kept clocking them as she and Ethan moved through the space. She stayed close to him. Not performed close, actually close in the way of someone who has been sharing a house with a person for 6 weeks and no longer needs to calculate proximity. She laughed when something was genuinely funny. She touched his sleeve when she had something to tell him. She turned toward him in conversation the way you turn toward a person you trust. Which was, she realized, with a quiet lurch of something in her chest. Because she did. She trusted Ethan Caldwell. When had that happened? Somewhere between the first cup of coffee at 2 a.m. and the grain of fabric conversation and the morning he'd told her about Claire without being asked. Somewhere in the 10,000 small, ordinary moments of a house that had stopped being a stage and started being a place. She didn't have time to sit with this discovery, because across the room she saw Marcus watching, not watching them the way he'd watched at the house, assessingly, skeptically. Watching with something sharper. He had a man next to him she didn't recognize, and the man had a phone out, and the phone was angled toward her and Ethan. Marcus has someone photographing us, she said quietly into the side of Ethan's conversation with a board member. She felt him register it without moving. Where? 11 o'clock, the man in the gray suit. A pause. The board member continued talking. Ethan responded to him normally and simultaneously brought his hand up to her back and simultaneously turned them both subtly so that they were angled away from the photographer without it looking like anything except a couple naturally orienting toward each other in conversation. The board member didn't notice. She did. Smart, she said under her breath. I've been doing this longer than I'd like, he said just as quietly. They kept moving. The hour stretched. Marcus stayed in her peripheral vision, patient, precise, the way of a man who had done the math on how long it would take for the pressure to produce a mistake. And then, just past the 90-minute mark, when the drinks had been flowing, and the room had warmed, and the social temperature had risen to the exact level where professional masks start slipping, a man named Gerald Whitmore made his move. Lila had read about Gerald in Ria's dossier. Late 60s major donor to 3 Caldwell business interests, now openly aligned with Marcus in the inheritance challenge. He was the kind of man who delivered attacks in the register of compliments, which made them harder to deflect without seeming thin-skinned. He found them at the edge of the main room, with 2 other couples in tow, witnesses. Lila noted carefully selected witnesses, and he shook Ethan's hand with the warmth of a man who intended to remove the floor under him. Ethan, wonderful to see you. And then, pivoting so smoothly, it was almost beautiful. And this must be... He looked at Lila with a smile that arrived fully formed. Well, you're not what I pictured. I rarely am, Lila said pleasantly. Gerald Whitmore, he said, offering his hand. She shook it. I know who you are. A small thing, a flicker of recalibration behind his eyes. I hope what you've heard is kind. I've heard you're thorough, she said. I respect thorough. He smiled more genuinely at that, the involuntary smile of a man who didn't expect to be met. How long have you and Ethan been together? Before the wedding, I mean. I confess I didn't know he was seeing anyone. We kept it quiet, she said. Ethan isn't someone who performs his personal life. No, he certainly isn't. Whitmore looked between them. Though I'd have thought. He stopped. Let the pause do its work. Forgive me, it's none of my business. Only the timing. It did seem somewhat sudden, Ethan said. Whitmore turned to him. The temperature shifted. When Ethan spoke now, it had the dropped voice quality that Lila had described to the deposition attorneys, the quiet that the room felt before he said anything further. When you've spent a long time being careful, Ethan said, the moment you stop is always going to look sudden to someone who is watching from the outside. Whitmore held the look. I'm sure. I'd think a man in your position would understand that, Ethan said. The gap between how something looks and what it actually is. A beat. 2. Whitmore's smile had thinned at the edges. Well, he said. Congratulations to you both. And moved away cleanly, the way of a man who has not gotten what he came for and is choosing the moment of departure strategically. The two couples drifted after him. Lila exhaled barely. She felt Ethan's hand still at her back. Felt his thumb move one small slow motion, barely there against the fabric of her dress. She didn't think he knew he'd done it. You were good, she said quietly. So were you. Whitmore will report back to Marcus. Yes. What will he say? That we looked real, Ethan said. And then lower, because we did. She turned slightly and looked up at him. He was looking out at the room, at the careful, pressure-tested world of the gala, and his expression was the complicated one. The one she'd spent 6 weeks learning to read. And what she saw in it right now was not strategy, was not management, was something underneath all of that, something that had been building quietly for weeks and was very close now to the surface. She looked away first. She needed to. Because if she didn't, she wasn't going to be able to keep the line clear. The line between what was performance and what was real, and she had promised herself she would keep that line. She had signed the page that said she would keep that line. She looked away and breathed and held the line. For now. The moment that broke everything came 40 minutes later from a direction she hadn't anticipated. Marcus himself. He'd been circling, she'd tracked him all evening, and he chose his moment with the precision of someone who had planned it. Ethan was briefly caught in conversation with a Foundation board member, Lila, 3 steps away, managing a separate exchange with a donor's wife, and Marcus materialized at her side with the smooth inevitability of a man who had been waiting for exactly this gap. Mrs. Caldwell. Not warm, not cold, precise. She turned. Marcus. He stood close enough to be intimate in a way that wasn't friendly. You've been impressive tonight, I mean that. Thank you. It must be exhausting, he said, performing this well for this long. She kept her face neutral. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. His voice was very low, too low to carry. Built for just the two of them. I've been watching you both all evening. You're good. You're genuinely good. But I've known Ethan Caldwell my entire life, and the one thing I know about him is that he doesn't let people in. A pause. Timed. Deliberate. Which means, whatever you're doing in that house, it's practice, not real, and the deposition is going to show that. She looked at him. And when it does, he said, the marriage gets invalidated. The inheritance ruling goes back to the original distribution, and Ethan loses the ranch. He let that sit for a moment. I don't want that. I'm not a monster. I'm just thorough. A cold echo of the word she'd used with Whitmore. He'd heard it. He'd filed it. So, here's what I'm suggesting. Before the hearing, you file for separation. You cite irreconcilable differences. It's clean, it's fast. It doesn't require anyone to say the word fraud. Ethan gets a settlement, we'll negotiate reasonably. You get to walk away without perjury on your record. Perjury. The word landed in her chest like a stone. She didn't let it show. She kept her face where it was neutral, even present, and she looked at Marcus Caldwell, and she thought he doesn't believe it's real, and he's using the one word that goes directly to the part of me that's afraid. "That's a generous offer," she said. "I think so. It would be more generous if it were true," she said. "But the marriage is not fraudulent, which means the offer is based on a false premise, which means there's nothing to accept." Marcus held her eyes. "You're protecting him." "I'm telling you the truth." "Or you've started believing your own performance." Something moved through her. Not anger. Deeper than anger. The particular heat of a thing that's been named too accurately for comfort. She breathed through it. She kept her face where she needed it. "You should talk to your attorney," she said. "Tell him the deposition went fine." She walked away from Marcus Caldwell with her hands loose at her sides and her heart doing something loud and complicated in her chest. She crossed the room without rushing. She found Ethan's shoulder in the crowd and put her hand on it briefly, naturally, and when he turned, she leaned up slightly, the way a wife does, the way you do it when it isn't staged, and said quietly against the side of his face, "Marcus just made me a separation offer. He used the word perjury. He's going to push harder in the next 4 days than he has so far." She felt him go very still. "Are you all right?" he said into her hair, the way you say it when you mean it. "I'm fine," she said. "But we need to leave in the next 20 minutes. He's watching, and I need to be somewhere that isn't here." "We go now," he said. 20 minutes. Don't let him see us rush." She stepped back. She smiled at him the way a woman smiles at a man she trusts. It wasn't hard. That was the part she was trying not to think about. They left at 23 minutes, not rushing. The natural, unhurried departure of a couple that had been here long enough. In the car, she told him everything, Marcus's exact words, the perjury angle, the separation offer. Ethan listened without interrupting, which was how he listened to things that mattered completely without performing the listening, the way most people can't. When she finished, the car was quiet. "He's not wrong that it's a risk," Ethan said. "I know. If the deposition answers don't hold, they'll hold," she said. "You don't know that." "Ethan?" She turned toward him in the dark of the car. "He called it a performance. He said I've been performing this whole time, and I need you to understand something." She stopped, started again. "I know what the contract says. I know what we agreed to. But the things I said in that deposition today about your coffee and your sleeping and your voice when you're angry and the way you love that damn horse that still doesn't trust you, none of that was performance. I was telling the truth. And the truth will hold because it's the truth." The car was very quiet. "Lila," he said. "Don't. I need to say this." She waited. "I told my attorney today. He said that you were the only person I'd been genuinely honest with in 2 years. He asked if I meant professionally or personally, and I said I didn't know how to separate them anymore." A pause. "He said that was a good sign. For the case." "Is that the only reason it's a good sign?" she said. The silence that followed was the longest one they'd had. Not empty, full pressurized, the specific weight of a thing that was very close to being said. "No," he said quietly. "It's not." She didn't answer. The car pulled through the gates. The house came into view. She watched it and felt something she wasn't ready to name, a rightward pull in her chest. A recognition that the house had started to look like a place she belonged rather than a place she was staying. 6 weeks ago, she had told herself 6 months. She had meant it the way you mean a number, a quantity of time, contained, measurable, over. She no longer thought of it that way. Turned. They were inside coats off the house, settling around them into its nighttime quiet, when Marcus's attorney called Ethan's phone. Whatever he said, Lila watched it happen on Ethan's face in real time, the tightening, the controlled processing of something that landed wrong. "What?" she said when he put the phone down. "Marcus filed the supplemental motion," he said. "The judge granted it. Deposition testimony will be heard at the preliminary hearing in 4 days." He set the phone on the counter. Both of us, in front of the judge. 4 days. Okay, she said. Lila? 4 days is enough, she said. We know each other. We told the truth. It'll hold. He looked at her across the kitchen. The overhead light was on. He'd turned it on when they came in, which he never did at night, and she noticed it the way she noticed everything about him now, which was completely and involuntarily and without her permission. He's going to try to break it in that room, Ethan said. Let him try. If he succeeds, he won't. You don't know. Ethan! She crossed the kitchen. She stood directly in front of him, closer than the arrangement had ever required, close in the way of someone who has stopped calculating distance. Look at me. He looked at her. I am not leaving this arrangement, she said. I am not taking Marcus's offer. I am not walking into that hearing room and saying anything other than the truth, because the truth is on our side, and I need you to trust that. His jaw moved. His eyes did the thing they did when he was feeling something real that he hadn't chosen and didn't know what to do with. Why, he said. It came out rough. Why are you doing this? The money's already secure. The transfer is scheduled regardless. Because it's not about the money anymore, she said. And then heard herself say it out loud in the kitchen with the overhead light on and his face 3 feet from hers. And I think you know that. The silence that followed was not the managed kind, was not the strategic kind, was the kind that has something alive in it, something neither of them had given permission to grow, but that had grown anyway in the spaces between 2 a.m. coffee and threadbare grain conversations, and hands that found backs without being told to. Lila, he said, lower than before. Don't manage this, she said. Don't make it into a problem to solve. I don't know how to not. I know, she said. I know you don't, but try. He looked at her, and something in him, the specific, tightly held thing she had been watching hold and hold and hold for 6 weeks, moved. Not broke, but moved. Shifted, the way a current shifts. Stay with me tonight, he said. Not a command, barely a request. More like something that had been inside him for a long time and had finally found its way out without asking. Don't ask me to explain it. Just stay. She should have said no. The contract said no. The line she had promised herself said no. She looked at him. And she didn't say no. She didn't say anything. And he closed the distance between them, not fast, not impulsive, but with the specific, deliberate intention of a man who has decided to stop managing himself, and he kissed her. Not performed, not strategic, not anything that belonged in the category of this arrangement, or this contract, or the careful, structured, legally documented life they had built inside this house. Real. Completely, terrifyingly, irreversibly real. And the moment it happened, Lila understood what she had been counting in the dark in all those late nights at her work table with the fabric in her hands, and her brain refusing to stop. She hadn't been counting his habits or his expressions or the small tells of a man learning to be present again. She had been counting down. To this. Without knowing it. The way you count down to something you haven't admitted you're waiting for. His hands were in her hair. She had both hands pressed flat against his chest, not pushing. Holding. The distinction mattered enormously, and she knew it with her whole body. Holding, not stopping. Present, not retreating. When they broke apart, the kitchen was exactly the same room it had been before. Same overhead light, same countertops, same house. Everything else was different. Ethan stepped back, not far. He kept one hand at her jaw, his thumb at her cheekbone, and he looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before and would never be able to unsee unmanaged. Fully, completely unmanaged. Not the 2 a.m. face, not the gala face, not the negotiating face, or the grief face, or the careful near smile. Just him. Just whatever he was underneath all the things he'd learned to perform. She looked back at him and felt not fear exactly, the cousin of fear, the feeling you get when something becomes real enough to lose. That wasn't in the contract, she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. No, he said. It wasn't. "Ethan, I know," he said. "I know what it means. I know what it changes. Do you—" He dropped his hand from her face, not pulling away, setting her down carefully the way you set down something that matters. "It changes everything," he said. "Which is the problem." She looked at him. He looked at her. And the kitchen held them both. And the overhead light held. And the house was very still around them. And outside, the Texas night was doing what it always did, waiting patient, enormous, indifferent to what the people inside it were deciding. "What do we do?" she said. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her with those unmanaged eyes, and she could see him for the first time, really see him not running the calculation. Not problem-solving. Just standing in something true that he hadn't chosen and not trying to fix it. "I don't know," he said. And the honesty of it. The clean, uncalculated honesty of a man who always knew what to do, admitting he didn't land it in her chest harder than anything else he'd said in 6 weeks. She nodded. Once. She picked up her coat from the counter where she'd dropped it. She walked to the hallway. She stopped at the doorway and turned back. He was still standing where she'd left him, still looking at her. 4 days, she said. "Let's get through the hearing, then we figure out the rest." "Yes," he said. "Good night, Ethan." He didn't answer right away. He looked at her for one long, full, honest moment. The kind of look that costs something, that doesn't pretend it isn't a look, that doesn't dress itself up as something else. "Good night, Lila," he said. She went upstairs. She did not sleep. And downstairs, for the first time in 6 weeks, Ethan Caldwell did not walk the halls. He stood in the kitchen with the light on and did not move for a very long time, because the walking had always been about the restlessness, and the restlessness had always been about the emptiness, and the emptiness. He was only now admitting this to himself, standing in his own kitchen at midnight with the taste of something real still present. The emptiness had started filling in quietly, without announcement, the moment a woman with 2 rolling bags and a garment case had walked into his house and refused to flinch. He turned off the light. He went upstairs. He did not walk. And the house held them both in the dark, and something that had been shifting for weeks finally landed, not with a crash, not with a declaration, but with the quiet, irreversible certainty of a thing that has found its place and will not be moved back. She made coffee at 6 the next morning, and he was already in the kitchen. Not walking, not restless. Sitting at the table with both hands around a mug, looking at nothing in particular, in the way of a man who had spent the night arriving at something rather than avoiding it. He looked up when she came in. She looked at him. Neither of them said good morning. She went to the cabinet, got her mug, poured from the pot he'd already made, sat down across from him. The table held them in silence for a full minute. "I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen," he said. "I'm not asking you to. And I'm not going to manage it into something smaller than it was." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "What are you going to do with it?" He looked at her steadily. "I don't know yet. But I'm not running from it." She nodded. Once. Something in her chest that had been braced overnight waiting. She realized for him to walk it back, to reconstruct the distance, to come downstairs in his professional face and treat last night like a miscalculation released. 4 days, she said. 4 days, he said. After the hearing. After the hearing, we talk about what this is, he said. All of it. Without the legal pressure as the context. Okay. Okay, he said. They drank their coffee. The house was quiet around them. Outside, the ranch was already moving. She could hear the earliest sounds of it, the particular alive quality of a working morning that she had grown used to without noticing she was growing used to it. "I need to call Rhea," he said. "I know. And my attorney, the hearing prep. I know, Ethan. Go." He stood. He picked up his mug. He was almost to the door when he stopped, not looking back, just stopping, one hand on the frame. A pause that had something in it. "Thank you," he said. "For last night. For not—" He stopped. Started again. "For not making it easier to walk back. She looked at his back, at the set of his shoulders, at the man who was learning slowly at real cost to stay in a room that didn't have a problem he could fix. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just don't walk it back." He didn't answer, but his hand tightened on the frame for a moment before he let go and moved into the hallway. She sat with her coffee and listened to the house hold the morning. Rhea arrived at 10 with her laptop and a legal pad and the particular contained urgency of someone who had been up since 5 managing variables. She sat at the dining table and spread her materials and looked between Ethan and Lila with the expression of someone doing a rapid recalculation she wasn't going to voice directly. "You seem different this morning," she said to neither of them specifically. "We're focused," Ethan said. Rhea looked at Lila. Lila met the look without explaining it. Rhea, who had not gotten where she was by missing things, let it go with the professional grace of a woman who understood which threads to pull and which to leave alone. "The hearing is in 4 days," she said. Marcus's team filed the supplemental deposition request with 3 specific areas of inquiry. First, the timeline of the relationship prior to marriage. Second, financial integration, shared accounts, joint decisions, evidence of a unified household. Third, she paused. Emotional testimony. They're going to ask both of you in front of the judge to describe your relationship in terms that cannot be scripted. "Can they do that?" Lila asked. "The judge has discretion to allow open questioning in a civil proceeding of this nature. And the judge in this case..." Rhea set down her pen. "Judge Hartwell is 63 years old, has been on the bench for 20 years, and has a documented history of ruling against arrangements he considers performative or legally convenient. He has dismissed 2 inheritance cases in the last 5 years on fraud grounds." A beat. "He will know if you're performing." The table was quiet. "We won't be," Lila said. Rhea looked at her again. Whatever she saw in Lila's face made her pick up her pen and move on without comment. "Financial records," she said. "I need everything that demonstrates a shared household. Joint decisions on household expenses, any evidence of financial consultation between you on personal matters." She looked at Ethan. "The separate accounts are a problem. Marcus's team will emphasize them." "We opened a joint account the 3rd week," Ethan said. "For household expenses," Rhea said. "It's thin. It's real," Lila said. "We talk about money, not just the household account. I know about the legal fees for the inheritance case. I know the Eastern pasture repair cost $42,000 last fall, and Ethan absorbed it personally, rather than putting it on the estate operating budget, because he didn't want it to look like the estate was being depleted during the dispute." She looked at Rhea. "I know because he told me. Because that's what people do when they live together, and they trust each other with the parts that are complicated." Rhea was very still for a moment. "Did you know I knew that?" Lila said to Ethan. "I knew I'd told you," he said. "I didn't think about it as evidence," she said. "Because it wasn't. It was just a conversation." She turned back to Rhea. "There will be a lot of that. Things that happened because they happened, not because we were building a file." Rhea looked between them again. This time, she let the recalculation show. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay. Let's work with that." Just a tongue. The next 3 days moved at 2 speeds simultaneously, the grinding, detailed, document-heavy speed of hearing preparation, and the faster, lighter, more frightening speed of something between Lila and Ethan that neither of them had named, and both of them could feel with complete accuracy. He was different, not transformed. Ethan Caldwell was not a man who transformed, but the quality of his presence in the house had shifted. He occupied his own space differently, with less of the deliberate management she'd spent weeks learning to see around. He came to breakfast without being anywhere else in his head. He asked her questions that were real questions about Becca, about the alteration studio, about what she would do with the space when she had enough money to expand. And he listened to the answers with the attention he usually reserved for problems that required solving, which was, she was realizing how he showed that something mattered. He was learning to stay in the room. She watched it happen with something in her chest that she had stopped trying to diagnose. On the second evening, sitting with their respective work in the same room, her with a client piece, him with the estate files he was preparing for the hearing, he looked up and said, without preamble, "Claire called me, last week." Lila set down her needle. She saw the announcement in the Austin paper. Our marriage. He looked at the file in his hand without reading it. She said she was glad, that she meant that genuinely. Do you believe her? Yes. No hesitation. Claire wasn't a cruel person. She was just done. And honest about being done. He set the file down. She asked if I was happy. What did you say? He looked at her. I said I was working on it. The echo of what Lila had told the deposition attorney landed between them. Exactly those words, the same answer chosen separately and meaning the same thing. That's what I told them, she said. In the deposition. I know. Rhea told me. A beat. I'm not sure it was still true by the time I said it. She looked at him carefully. What do you mean? I mean, I was already past working on it, he said. I just hadn't caught up to that yet. The room was very still. Ethan, I know we said after the hearing, he said. I'm not jumping past that. I just needed you to know that the thing I said to Claire was already changing when I said it. He picked up the file again. That's all. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her needle. She went back to the seam in her hands. For what it's worth, she said quietly to the fabric. I stopped working on it about 2 weeks ago. She didn't look up. But she heard him, not a sound, barely a breath, absorb that and hold it. They worked in silence for another hour. The quietest, fullest, most inhabited silence she had ever sat in. The twist came on this morning of the third day, 48 hours before the hearing, and it came from a direction neither of them had prepared for. Doris knocked on the study door at 8:15 with the expression of someone delivering information she would prefer not to be delivering. There's a woman at the gate, she said. She says her name is Claire Merritt. She says she needs to speak with Ethan. Lila was in the study with Ethan and Rhea going over the final hearing prep. The three of them went quiet at the same time. Ethan stood up. Tell her I'll be out. Doris nodded and left. Rhea looked at Ethan with the controlled alarm of a woman running probability calculations in real time. Lila looked at him with the specific measured calm of someone who was working very hard to have no visible reaction. You don't have to be here for this, he said to Lila. I know. If you want to. I'm staying, she said. He looked at her. Something in his expression, relief she thought. Not what she'd expected, but unmistakable. All right, he said. Claire Merritt was tall, composed, and carrying the particular self-possessed quality of a woman who has arrived at a difficult decision and made peace with the discomfort of executing it. She came into the sitting room without hesitating, saw Lila, and stopped briefly, one breath's worth of surprise before continuing forward. She looked at Lila directly. You're Lila? Yes. I'm glad he found someone. She said it simply without performance. Then she turned to Ethan. Marcus called me. The room temperature dropped. When? Ethan said. 3 days ago. He wanted a statement. From me. About the marriage. About... She paused. About whether I believed it was genuine given what I knew about Ethan's capacity for his words, emotional availability. Lila watched Ethan's jaw tighten. Watched him hold it. What did you say? He asked. I said no, Claire said. Obviously. She sat down without being invited the way of someone who has been in this house before and is not performing a visit. But I'm here because I think you need to know what he's building. He's been calling people. Anyone who was adjacent to our marriage, our separation. He's compiling testimony about patterns, about Claire, about the history. She glanced at Lila again, and her eyes were complicated and honest. He's going to use our marriage to argue that Ethan is constitutionally incapable of genuine emotional partnership, which makes any current marriage suspect. The room was very quiet. "He can't use your marriage without your consent," Rhea said sharply. "He has letters, emails, things I sent to mutual friends during the separation." Claire's voice was steady, but the steadiness cost her something. "I was not kind about Ethan's emotional limitations in those letters. I was accurate, but I was not kind. And taken out of context, they read as—" She stopped. "Evidence," Ethan said. "Flat. Stripped." "Yes." Lila looked at Ethan. She watched him process it, the particular held stillness of a man absorbing something that hits close to a wound he thought he'd managed. His past being used as a weapon against his present. The worst version of himself drawn in old ink being submitted as proof of who he was now. She stood up. Both Claire and Ethan looked at her. "Rhea," Lila said. "Can those letters be excluded on privacy grounds?" "Possibly, but exclusion requests take time. Then we don't fight the letters," Lila said. "We answer them." She turned to Claire. "Would you testify? Not about the letters, about the change. About what you saw when you called him last week. About what you heard in his voice when you asked if he was happy." Claire looked at her steadily, then at Ethan. Something passed between them, not romantic, not regretful. The particular complex nothing of two people who have genuinely moved past something and are only now fully aware of it. "Yes," Claire said, "if that's what's needed." "It's not necessary to," Ethan started. "Ethan." Lila turned to him. "Let people help you." He looked at her. She held it. "All right," he said. Quiet. Rough. Like the words cost him specifically because he meant them. Rhea was already writing. After Claire left 40 minutes later with Rhea's contact information and a promise to make herself available to the legal team, Ethan and Lila were alone in the sitting room. He stood at the window with his back to her. She knew that posture. The held-together posture. The one that meant something had gotten through the management, and he was deciding what to do with it. "He went to Claire," he said. "Yes. He dug up 10-year-old emails from a divorce and is going to present them to a judge as character evidence." "Yes. That's—" He stopped. His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before. Not anger. Colder than anger. "That's not a legal strategy. That's personal." "It was always personal," she said. "You knew that." He turned. His face was doing the complicated thing, but more of it showing than usual. More than she'd seen in 8 weeks. The controlled surface thinner, more worn down. "He's going to tell the judge I'm not capable of a real relationship," he said. "I know. And he's going to use Claire's words to prove it." "I know. What if—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "What if Hartwell believes it? A 63-year-old judge who has thrown out 2 cases on fraud grounds looking at Ethan Caldwell's emotional history. He's going to see Claire testify about what she heard last week," Lila said, "and then he's going to see me, and I'm going to tell him the truth. The truth that we started this as a contract. The truth that it isn't one anymore." He looked at her across the room with that unmanaged expression, the one she'd seen for the first time in the kitchen 2 nights ago, and hadn't been able to unsee since. But more of it now. All of it, really. Nothing held back. "You're not afraid of that," he said. "I'm terrified of it," she said. "That's different from being unwilling." Something broke open in his face, not dramatically, not with any visible collapse, but she felt it, the specific release of something that had been held very long under very high pressure, finally finding a way through. He crossed the room. He didn't kiss her. He put both hands on her face and looked at her close, the way you look at something true that you almost let yourself miss. "After the hearing," he said, barely above a breath. "After the hearing," she said. He dropped his hands. He stepped back. But the room had changed again. It kept doing that, changing around them, accommodating something that grew regardless of whether they gave it permission. Rhea called at 9 that evening. Marcus filed a new motion 2 hours ago, she said. He's adding a witness. A woman named Sandra Oaks, former employee. She worked as Ethan's personal assistant for 8 months 4 years ago. Marcus's team is saying she has direct knowledge of Ethan's approach to personal relationships. A pause. I'm still pulling her background, but the filing suggests her testimony will be character-based. The same argument as the letters. Ethan was very still. 4 years ago, Lila said. Before the divorce. Pre-Claire's departure by about 2 years. I don't know yet what she has or what she's been told to say. Ria's voice was tight. But the judge gets to decide whether to allow character witnesses at the preliminary, and given Hartwell's history, he'll allow it, Ethan said. Probably. A beat. I need you both in my office at 8 tomorrow morning. We have 32 hours. When the call ended, Ethan set his phone down with the specific careful motion of a man not trusting his own grip. Sandra Oaks, Lila said. I know who she is. Is there anything she knows that... She knows I'm not good at this, he said. The same thing Claire knows. The same thing anyone who has spent significant time with me knows. His voice was level, but stripped. Marcus has been thorough. He's built a case from every version of me that existed before. He stopped. Before what? She said. He looked at her. Before you. She held that. That's the problem, he said. I can't tell the judge that I'm different now because of the woman I married for business reasons. That's exactly what Marcus wants the judge to think we're doing. We're not going to tell the judge that, Lila said. Then what are we going to say? The truth, she said, which is that you're different, not because of me, because you chose to be, because when someone showed you what staying in a room actually looked like, you recognized it and you chose it. She looked at him directly. I didn't change you, Ethan. You changed yourself. I was just here, he said. Present, she said. There's a difference. He was quiet for a long moment. Ria's going to want us to frame this legally, he said. Controlled, strategic. Ria's job is the legal strategy, Lila said. Our job is the truth. They can coexist. And if they don't? If Hartwell looks at Sandra Oaks and Claire's letters and the timeline and... Then we lose the hearing, Lila said. And we figure out what comes after that. She kept her eyes on him. But I'm not walking into that room and performing something. I tried that for 8 weeks, and it stopped being performance about 6 weeks ago, and I'm done pretending otherwise in front of a judge or anyone else. His breath came out slow. 8 weeks, he said. You stopped 2 weeks ago. That means it took you about 6 weeks to stop being able to perform it. She hadn't realized he'd done that math. Yes. It took me 4, he said. She stared at him. I was counting 2, he said quietly. The air between them was something she didn't have words for. She wasn't going to look for them right now. Right now there was a hearing in 32 hours and a new witness and Ria's office at 8 in the morning. But she held the number. 4 weeks. He'd stopped being able to perform it 4 weeks ago. He'd been living with that for 4 weeks, managing it, carrying it, doing the walking and the nighttime circuits, and the careful distance while already knowing the distance was a lie. 4 weeks. She thought about all the evenings she'd spent at her work table telling herself contract and 6 months and professional arrangement. All the mornings she'd made coffee for 2 and called it strategy. All the time they had both spent being more honest in their behavior than in anything they said. We should try to sleep, she said. Yes. 32 hours. I know. Ethan. He looked at her. Whatever happens, she said, in that room, with the judge and Marcus and Sandra Oaks and Claire's letters, whatever the outcome is. She held his eyes. The answer to the question Hartwell is going to ask, whether this is real, the answer is yes. And I need you to know that I know that. Regardless of what the contract says, or what it started as, or what we told each other at the beginning. He looked at her for a long time. His face was the honest one. fully honest all the way down. "I know," he said. "I need you to know that I know." "Good. Good night, Lila." "Good night." She went to her room. She lay in the dark. She looked at Catherine Caldwell's ring on her hand in the light from the window. She thought about the woman who had worn it first, and then her daughter, and then the long, unbroken line of women who had held something real inside a world that had plenty of reasons to make it complicated. She pressed her palm flat against the mattress. She thought about 4 weeks versus 6 weeks, and how the math of two people falling into something true is never the same on both sides, and never needs to be. She thought about the hearing, about Sandra Oaks, about Marcus and his letters, and his thorough, patient, methodical strategy for dismantling what he believed was a performance. She thought he doesn't know it isn't. Not anymore. At 2 in the morning, for the first time in 3 weeks, she heard footsteps in the hallway. She lay still. Listened. Down the hall toward the stairs. Pause. Then, instead of continuing to the kitchen, the footsteps stopped outside her door. She waited. A quiet knock. She got up, opened the door. He was standing in the hallway with the nighttime expression, the real one, and he looked at her and said, "I can't stop running the probability." "What probability?" "That we lose tomorrow." She looked at him. "Come in." He came in. He sat in the chair by her work table, the chair that had been his functionally for the last 3 weeks from all the evenings they'd worked in the same room. She sat on the edge of the bed facing him. "Tell me the worst version," she said. "Hartwell accepts Sandra's testimony and the letters. Rules the marriage fraudulent. Marcus gets the injunction. The inheritance dispute goes back to probate." He looked at his hands. "I lose the ranch." The ranch. Not the money. Not the legal standing. The ranch, 30 acres and a gray horse that didn't trust anyone, and soil that fought you, and water access it had taken 3 years to restore. "And then what?" she said. He looked up. "What? After you lose the ranch, then what?" He stared at her like she'd asked the question in another language. "I fight it in appeals. And in the meantime, I..." He stopped. He didn't have the next line. She watched him realize he didn't have it, watched the specific shock of a man who has run every practical calculation and has not run the personal one. "In the meantime," she said quietly, "you're still you. And I'm still here. And the things that changed between us in the last 8 weeks don't live in the ranch or the inheritance or the hearing outcome." She held his eyes. "I'm not here because of the contract, Ethan. I know we said that, but I need you to actually believe it." He looked at her with those direct, honest, unmanaged eyes. "I believe it," he said. Not quickly, not to reassure her. The way he said things he'd verified. "Then stop running the probability on the worst case," she said. "Run the one that matters." "Which one is that?" She looked at him steadily. "The one where we walk into that room tomorrow and tell the truth, and it's enough." He held her gaze for a long moment. Something settled in him. She could see it happen, the specific settling of a man who has found the thing he was looking for and hadn't known he was looking for it. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. "I should let you sleep. You should let yourself sleep." He stood. He moved toward the door. He stopped, not in the managed way, not calculating, just stopped, turned back and looked at her with an expression that was very simple and very full and didn't require anything from either of them. "Thank you," he said, "for being the person who doesn't flinch." She looked at him. "Thank you for being the person who noticed." He left. She heard him go down the hall. She heard his door. She heard silence. She lay back. She looked at the ceiling. She pressed both palms flat on the mattress and felt the ring and felt the house around her and felt underneath the hearing and Marcus and the 32 hours and everything that was still unresolved, the steady, specific, grounded weight of something real. Not performance, not strategy, not 6 months counted down like a sentence. Something she had walked into thinking she knew the shape of and had found on the other side of it to be entirely different than it looked. The way things are, she thought, when they matter. The way things always are. Ria's office at 8 in the morning had the specific energy of a room where people had already been working for hours before anyone arrived. 3 attorneys, 2 paralegals, and a woman. Lila hadn't met before. Introduced as Janet Howe, a litigation specialist, Ria had pulled in overnight all of them with the focused, compressed efficiency of people who understood that 30 hours was not enough and were going to make it enough anyway. Lila and Ethan sat side by side at the conference table, not touching, but close in the way they were close now, the kind of closeness that doesn't need contact to be felt. Janet opened without preamble. Sandra Oakes was Ethan's personal assistant from 4 years ago. She left after 8 months. Her filing states she witnessed patterns of emotional withdrawal and deliberate personal detachment that she believes are incompatible with genuine marital partnership. She looked at Ethan. "Do you know what specifically she's referring to?" "Yes," he said. "Tell me." He told it cleanly without flinching. A period 8 months 4 years ago, 6 months after the first serious cracks in his marriage to Claire, had appeared when he had functioned at a level of emotional shutdown that he was not proud of and did not dispute. He had worked 18-hour days. He had canceled personal plans without explanation. He had on at least 3 occasions, Sandra would remember, said things in professional settings that made clear he was treating his marriage as a logistical problem rather than a relationship. "She's not wrong about what she observed," he said. "She's wrong about what it means now." "The problem," Janet said, "is that Marcus's argument is not that you were like this 4 years ago. His argument is that you are constitutively like this, that it's not a phase or a period, it's you, and that any current marriage displaying signs of genuine partnership is therefore by definition manufactured." The table was quiet. "What defeats that argument?" Lila asked. Janet looked at her. "Evidence of change that predates and exists independent of the legal incentive to appear changed." Meaning, if the change in Ethan happened because of you, because of the marriage which was initiated as a legal strategy, Marcus will argue the change itself is part of the strategy. She leaned forward. "We need evidence that the change is real, not performed, not legally motivated, real." "How do you demonstrate that to a judge?" Lila said. "You can't demonstrate it," Janet said. "You can only testify to it, and the judge decides whether he believes you." Lila looked at Ethan. He was looking at the table. She could see him doing the thing, the assessment, the probability, the careful management of a situation that had no clean solution. She put her hand on the table, not on his hand, just on the table close present. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Then we testify," she said. "And Hartwell decides." Ria spent 4 hours walking them through it. Not scripting, she had learned by now, watching them, that scripting was the wrong approach. Instead, she asked questions. Hard ones, the kind Marcus's attorney would ask, and she watched them answer, and she watched the answers land true. And she made notes with the focused quiet of someone adjusting a strategy in real time. At noon, she called a break. Lila went to the hallway to call Becca. She hadn't talked to her sister in 11 days. That was the longest gap in 3 years. Becca answered on the second ring with the slightly too casual voice of someone who had been waiting for the call and didn't want to seem like it. "Hey, you okay?" "I'm fine," Lila said. "Hearings tomorrow." "The contract work thing?" "Yes." A pause. "Lila, it's not just contract work, is it?" It wasn't a question. Becca had always been like that. She'd gotten their mother's directness without the diplomatic coding. "It's complicated," Lila said. "You've been there 8 weeks and I've called you every 3 days and you always sound like someone who is trying to sound normal, which means you're not." Lila leaned against the wall, closed her eyes for a moment. "I'm okay, Becca." "That's not what I asked." "I know." A breath. I went in thinking I knew exactly what it was, and it turned out to be something else." Silence on Becca's end. Then, "Is he good to you?" Lila thought about coffee at 2 a.m. and a hand at her back, and a man standing in a doorway saying thank you for being the person who doesn't flinch. "Yes," she said. "He is." "Then stop trying to manage it," Becca said. "That's the thing you do when you're scared. You manage instead of feel." "When did you get this wise?" "I've been watching you manage things my whole life," Becca said. "I know what it looks like." Lila opened her eyes, looked at the hallway wall. "After tomorrow," she said. "I'll explain everything after tomorrow." "Okay," Becca said. "Call me the minute it's done." "I will." "And Lila." A beat. "Stop managing it." She hung up and stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she went back into the conference room. Ethan looked at her when she came in. One look brief, reading her the way he'd learned to read her over 8 weeks of close quarters. "Okay," he said. "Yes," she said, and meant it. That evening back at the house was the quietest evening they'd had. Not empty quiet, the full kind. The kind she had learned to recognize as the specific quality of silence that exists between two people who have said most of what needs to be said and are resting in the space before the last thing. Doris had left dinner on the stove. They ate at the kitchen table, not the long formal dining table of those first stiff evenings. The kitchen table, the one that had become theirs over the accumulated weight of 8 weeks of mornings. He told her over dinner about the ranch in its earliest form. His grandfather William buying the land in the 50s with money he'd saved over 12 years and a loan from a man who'd believed in him without collateral. The way the property had been built piece by piece over 3 generations of Caldwells, who understood that land was not an asset, it was an argument. An argument that the family intended to continue existing, to continue mattering, to continue standing in the specific place where they'd chosen to stand. "That's what Marcus doesn't understand," Ethan said. "He thinks this is about money. The inheritance, the valuation, the—" He shook his head. "It was never about money." "What is it about?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "Continuity," he said. "The argument that we keep going. That what the people before us built was worth continuing." He paused. "My grandfather left it to me specifically because he believed I understood that. Marcus has never believed anything was worth continuing. He only believes things are worth acquiring." Lila held that. "Tell Hartwell that," she said. "Exactly that. Not the legal version. That version." He looked at her. "That's not evidence. It's the truth," she said. "Which is what Hartwell said he was looking for." He was quiet for a moment. "You've been listening to everything." "I listen to everything," she said. "You know that." Something softened in his face. The good kind of softening, the kind that means the armor has come off because it isn't needed. "Yes," he said. "I do." They finished eating. She washed the dishes. He stood beside her and dried them, not because it was necessary, not because Doris wouldn't handle it in the morning, but because it was the kind of thing that happens in a household between two people who have stopped performing and started simply being. She handed him the last dish. Their hands overlapped on it for a moment. He didn't move his hand. Neither did she. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said. "I know," she said. "No, I need to say this one. Tonight." He set the dish down carefully. He turned toward her. "When I asked you to stay that night at the gala, I wasn't asking you to stay for the case. I wasn't asking because of Marcus or the hearing or any of it. I was asking because—" He stopped. "Because the house feels different when you're in it. And I'd spent enough of my life in a house that felt like nothing to know the difference." She looked at him. "I didn't choose you randomly," he said. "I know the contract narrative says I went through a vetting process and selected based on criteria and circumstances, and—" He shook his head. "My attorney sent me 6 names, 6 women in Austin who fit the logistical requirements. I met with 2 of them. And then there was a file that said Lila Hart Alteration Studio, Southeast Austin, And there was a photograph from her studio's website, and something in me. He stopped again. Something in you, she said softly. Something in me, said her. He looked directly at her. Not because of the photograph, because of the expression. Because you looked like someone who was working very hard and not asking anyone to notice, and I recognized that in a way I didn't have language for. And I told my attorney set up the meeting. She looked at him in the kitchen light, at the man who had sat across a lawyer's table from her 8 weeks ago and looked at her like a contract, and had spent the last 8 weeks discovering she was something else entirely. You never told me that, she said. I know. Why now? Because tomorrow we walk into a room and tell a judge the truth, he said. And I wanted to make sure I'd told you all of it first. She looked at him for a long time. The kitchen held them, and the house held the kitchen, and something very large and very quiet was present in the room. With them had been present for weeks, patient waiting for them to catch up to it. I stopped wanting to leave, she said, about 6 weeks ago. I've been living in that fact without saying it, because saying it changed what we were doing here, and I wasn't ready to change what we were doing here. She held his eyes. I'm ready now. He looked at her. His expression was the honest one, all the way down, nothing held back. Lila. Don't ask me if I'm sure, she said. I wasn't going to. Good. I was going to say. He took one step toward her. I was going to say that I have not been this certain of anything in longer than I can accurately measure, and that I am deeply aware that this is not the moment I would have designed for saying so, and that I'm saying it anyway because I have spent too long in this life designing moments instead of living in them. She felt her throat tighten, not from sadness, the other kind, the kind that comes when something true lands exactly where it belongs. Ethan, she said. Yes, he said, not a question. She stepped toward him. He was already meeting her. And this time there was no gala behind them, and no legal strategy, and no performance for any room. Just the kitchen and the dish towel still in his hand, and his arms around her, and her face against his shoulder, and the specific weight of two people who had found their way to something real by the most impractical possible route. He held her. She let herself be held. Which was, she was realizing its own kind of courage. The particular courage of a woman who had been holding everything for so long that letting someone else take some of the weight required more bravery than the holding ever had. We should sleep, she said into his shoulder. Yes, he said. He didn't move. She didn't either. After a moment she straightened. He let her. He kept one hand at her arm briefly, just briefly, and then let that go too, with the specific intentionality of a man who had learned to hold things without gripping them. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he said. She went upstairs. She did not hear him walk the halls. The courtroom was smaller than she'd imagined. Not dramatic, just a room, a judge's bench, a gallery with 12 people in it, most of them lawyers. Marcus sat at his table with his legal team and the composed certainty of a man who believed he had built something airtight. He looked at Lila when she came in. She looked back. Neither of them said anything. Judge Hartwell entered at 9 exactly, 63 years old, with the particular authority of a man who had spent 20 years hearing people's versions of the truth and had become very good at finding where the versions ended and the truth began. He looked at both parties. He looked at his documents. He said, "We'll begin with the supplemental testimony, Ms. Oakes." Sandra Oakes was nervous in the way of someone who had agreed to something and was only now fully understanding what agreeing meant. She answered Marcus's attorney's questions carefully, the same patterns Ethan had described, the same 8 months, the same emotional shutdown. Her voice was steady, but she didn't look at Ethan. When Marcus's attorney finished, Rhea stood. "Ms. Oakes," Rhea said, "the period you've described, was it before or after Mr. Caldwell's marriage began experiencing serious difficulties?" Sandra paused. "It was during. When things were already..." Was it possible that what you observed was a man in personal crisis rather than a man demonstrating his permanent character? Yes, possibly. Did Mr. Caldwell ever behave in a way that was unkind to you personally? No. Did he fulfill his professional responsibilities during that period? Yes, completely. Did he ever speak to you about his marriage? A longer pause. Once. He said he didn't know how to fix it, and he thought the only thing he knew how to do was work harder. Did that sound to you like a man who didn't care about his marriage, or a man who didn't know how to be in one? Sandra looked at her hands. The second one, she said quietly. Rhea sat down. Marcus's attorney was already on his feet. The objection, the redirect the four-way argument that burned through the next 40 minutes. Lila sat through it with her hands folded and her face neutral and her attention completely on Hartwell, who watched it all with the specific patience of a man who was collecting data rather than reacting to theater. Then Claire took the stand. Marcus's attorney tried to enter the letters. Rhea objected on privacy grounds. Hartwell allowed 2 of them, excluded 3, and looked at Claire with the particular attention he'd been giving everything. Claire testified about the marriage and its end honestly, without cruelty, in the way Lila had expected from a woman who had looked at her and said, "I'm glad he found someone without any visible lie in it." She described what she'd observed. She did not soften it. Then Rhea asked, "You spoke with Mr. Caldwell recently?" "Last week," Claire said. "What was your impression of him in that conversation?" Claire looked at her hands for a moment, then at the judge. "He sounded present," she said. "That's the only word for it, like someone who had come back from somewhere and didn't want to leave again." A beat. "He asked about my work. He asked how I was. He listened. The Ethan I was married to didn't know how to listen when he was distracted. Last week he wasn't distracted." She paused. "I don't know how to explain it precisely. I just know the difference." Hartwell wrote something down. Marcus's attorney crossed with precision and speed, trying to reframe Claire's testimony as the subjective impression of a sympathetic ex-wife. Claire held her ground without anger, which was more effective than defensiveness would have been. Then Hartwell looked at his notes. "I'll hear from both parties directly," he said. "Mr. Caldwell." Ethan stood. He was calm in a way Lila had not seen before. Not the managed calm of a man controlling his presentation. The actual calm of a man who had decided what he was going to say, and was no longer carrying the weight of the decision. He stood at the front of the room, and he looked at the judge, and he told the truth. He told it from the beginning. The inheritance, the will, the legal exposure, Marcus's challenge. He did not pretend the marriage had begun any other way than it had. He said, "I entered a contractual arrangement with Lila Hart because I needed legal protection, and she needed financial relief. That is accurate, and I am not disputing it." Marcus's attorney was already reaching for his pen. "What is also accurate," Ethan said, "is that I am not the same person who signed that contract 8 weeks ago. Not because I chose to perform change for this hearing, because I was changed by 8 weeks of living honestly inside my own house, with a person who refused to let me perform anything." He paused. "My previous marriage failed because I treated it as a system to be managed rather than a life to be lived. I knew that. I had known it for 2 years. I did not know how to change it until someone showed me what changing it actually looked like, not in theory, not as an argument, but daily in the kitchen at 2 in the morning over fabric and coffee, and the honest, unglamorous reality of 2 people learning to be in the same space without pretending." The room was very quiet. "I am not asking this court to rule on the validity of my feelings," Ethan said. "I am asking this court to rule on the validity of my marriage, and I am telling you it is valid. Not because we performed it correctly for the right audience, because it is real, and I am prepared to spend as long as it takes in this room or any other demonstrating that." He sat down. Lila's hands were folded on the table. She pressed them harder against each other to keep them still. Hartwell looked at her. "Ms. Caldwell." She stood. She had prepared things to say. Rhea had prepared things for her to say. She looked at the judge at the 20 years of careful attention behind his eyes, and she set the prepared things down. "I signed a contract," she said. "It said, among other things, that I would maintain emotional non-involvement for the duration of the arrangement. I violated that term." She let that sit for a moment. "Not deliberately, not strategically. I violated it the way you violate any agreement that turns out to be asking something that was never actually possible, because the situation you're in turns out to be different from the situation you thought you were entering." She kept her eyes on Hartwell. "I went into that house as a professional. I came out of it knowing the names of his grandfather's horses and the specific cost of the eastern pasture repair, and exactly how long he walks at night when he can't stop thinking. I know those things because he told me. Not because it was contractually useful to tell me. Because that's what happens when two people stop performing for each other and start simply being." She took a breath. "I am not here to argue the contract's origins. I am here to tell you what the contract became. And what it became is the most real thing I have been part of in a long time. Your Honor, you can rule however you rule. But the thing you're questioning, whether this marriage is genuine, I can tell you with complete honesty it is. And I would have said that even if it cost us the hearing." She sat down. The room was quiet for a long time. Then Hartwell wrote something. He looked up. "Mr. Marcus Caldwell's supplemental motion alleged fraudulent marital arrangement in the context of the inheritance dispute." His voice was even deliberate, choosing each word with judicial care. "In my 20 years on this bench, I have seen two categories of testimony in cases of this nature. The first is the testimony of people who have prepared their truth. The second is the testimony of people who are simply telling it." He looked at his notes. "This court finds the testimony of both parties in the matter of the primary marriage to be credible, consistent, and indicative of a genuine marital partnership that, regardless of its origins, has developed into a substantive and authentic relationship." He set his pen down. "The supplemental motion is denied. The challenge to the inheritance distribution on grounds of marital fraud is dismissed. The original terms of William James Caldwell's will stand." Marcus's attorney was on his feet immediately. Hartwell held up one hand without looking at him. "I'll hear appeals in writing. Not today." He looked at his documents. "We're adjourned." The gavel, and the room broke open around them. Rhea was saying something. Janet was saying something. Marcus's team was in urgent, controlled conversation across the room. Lila heard it all from a slight distance, the specific distance of a person whose system is processing something it wasn't fully prepared for, despite having prepared for it. She felt Ethan's hand find hers under the table. Not a gesture for the room. The room was in motion around them. Nobody looking. Just his hand finding hers in the specific quiet way of someone who has learned that presence doesn't require an audience. She turned her hand over. Held his. "It held," she said. "It held," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. And whatever was in both of their faces in that moment, relief, yes, but not only that, not mainly, that was the specific expression of two people who had walked into a room carrying the full weight of something real and had been told by a man paid to know the difference that it was exactly what they believed it was. Marcus walked past their table on his way out. He didn't stop. He looked at Lila once, not with the calculating assessment of the gala, not with the cold precision of the corridor offer. Just a look. The look of a man who has run a thorough strategy and found that thoroughness, for once, was not enough. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. He left. Outside in the parking lot, Rhea held a brief debrief, next steps documentation, the formal dismissal paperwork that would take 2 weeks to process. Lila listened. Ethan answered. They were professional and specific and said all the right things. When Rhea and Janet finally got in their car, it was just Ethan and Lila in the parking lot. Texas Sun Concrete, the ordinary world going about its ordinary business. "The ranch is safe," she said. "Yes." Meridian can stop worrying. He almost laughed. It came out almost complete this time, closer than she'd ever gotten it. She filed it. "I want to tell you something," he said. "You told me a lot last night. There's one more thing." She waited. "I picked your name from the list," he said. "I told you that. What I didn't tell you is that after I picked it, I had my attorney call your studio, and I sat in a car outside it for 20 minutes before the meeting was scheduled." She stared at him. "You came to the studio. I sat outside it." He looked at her steadily. "I watched you through the window, working. You had a piece of blue fabric and you were holding it up to the light checking something, and you had this expression." He stopped. "You looked like someone completely inside what they were doing. Not performing it, not managing it. Actually, inside it." He paused. "I had forgotten that was possible. Watching someone actually be inside what they were doing. I had forgotten that I used to be able to do that, before I made everything into something to be managed." She looked at him. She didn't say anything because there was nothing that would add to what he'd just said. It was already complete. "You made me remember it," he said. "Not by doing anything. Just by being the kind of person who is actually present in their own life, which sounds like a small thing." "It isn't," she said. "No," he said. "It isn't." She looked at him in the parking lot in the Texas sun, at this man who had watched her through a window before he ever sat across a table from her, who had chosen her for reasons he hadn't known how to say, yet who had walked the halls at night and drunk his coffee in the dark, and spent 8 weeks learning to stay in a room, and had somewhere in the course of it become someone who didn't need to walk anymore. "Take me home," she said. Something moved through his face, warm, full, the honest version of every expression she had ever caught and filed. "Yes," he said. On the drive back, she called Becca. Becca answered before the first ring finished. "Well, we won," Lila said. A sound from Becca that was somewhere between a shout and a laugh. "I knew it. I knew what else you said but there was a weight to it." "There's a weight to a lot of things," Lila said. "Lila, he's right here." "Then I'm saying this for both of you. Stop managing it." A beat. "Actually, is it still possible to manage it at this point?" Lila looked at Ethan. He was watching the road, but she could see the corner of his mouth. "No," she said. "It's really not." "Good," Becca said. "Call me this weekend. I want to meet him." She hung up. The car was quiet. "She wants to meet you," Lila said. "I know. I heard." "She's direct." "I know that too." He glanced at her briefly. "I'm looking forward to it." She looked at him. She thought about fabric cut on the grain, about things that fight you until you stop fighting them back. About a gray horse that had taken 3 years and still wasn't done. About a man who walked the halls at night because stillness was the one thing he couldn't manage, and who had stopped walking the night she'd told him she wasn't leaving. She thought about a contract with a clause about emotional non-involvement, signed by 2 people who had both in their different ways already started violating it before the ink dried. She thought about the specific courage of a man who chose to be seen. She thought, this is what it looks like, not the version from the outside looking in through a window. The inside. The actual thing. The gates came into view. The house beyond them. She had stopped thinking of it as his house several weeks ago without noticing the moment it happened. It was, she realized now, just home. The place she would have to intentionally leave rather than the place she was temporarily staying. The distinction was enormous and simple, and had been true for longer than she'd been willing to admit. He pulled through the gates. "Ethan," she said. "Yes." "I want to renegotiate the contract." He looked at her. "The original terms are no longer operable," she said, "given current conditions." His mouth moved. This time the laugh came out actual, complete, unheld, the laugh of a man who has stopped managing even his own relief. It lasted only a moment, but it was fully real, and she felt it in her chest, like something restored. "Current conditions," he said. "Substantial changes to the emotional landscape," she said. "Non-involvement clause clearly unenforceable. Recommend dissolving the original terms and renegotiating from the present state of affairs." He pulled up to the house, cut the engine, turned toward her in the seat with that expression, the honest one, the full one, the one she would never be able to unsee and had stopped wanting to. "What are the terms of the new agreement?" he said. She looked at him. "Stay," she said. "Not because of any contract. Just stay." He looked at her for one long, still, honest moment, the kind of moment that doesn't need anything added to it, that is exactly the size of what it is. "Yes," he said. "Not a legal term, not a performance, not a strategy or a calculation or a carefully managed decision. Just a man and the truth and the single word that contains everything worth saying." She stepped out of the car. He stepped out of the car. They walked into the house together, through the door, into the hallway, into the life that had started as something else entirely, and had become, by the most impractical and irreversible route, the only one either of them wanted. The door closed behind them, and some contracts end exactly when they're supposed to, the moment they're no longer needed, because the real thing has taken their place, and the real thing, once it arrives, does not require a signature. It only requires the choice to stay. And they had both finally made it.